Okay, my friends, welcome once again to the next episode here, the Red Delta Project podcast and live feed Q&A, helping you break free of the diet and exercise rat race and get stronger with the power of calisthenics. I'm Matt Schifferly, as always, happy to have you on board. And today's episode is titled 10 Things You Have to Know About Building Muscle with Calisthenics Training. This is kind of a episode that I sometimes make these videos that I post on the RDP YouTube channel or on the website that kind of serve as a reference material for future individuals who are coming to the world of calisthenics, who are new to it, new to building muscle, new to Red Delta Project. And sometimes I make these videos not just for you to listen to now, but also for you to kind of come back to and remind yourself, like, these are the things you want to know and focus on. And when I find a lot of people come to the world of calisthenics to build muscle, they get really lost in the weeds and the details of what they're trying to do. And most of it just gets them running around in circles, and paralysis by analysis kicks in and they end up going nowhere. So if you came to me at a party and you were like, all right, blank slate, empty cup, I want to build muscle and I want to do it primarily with the freedom and independence that comes with body weight training, what do I need to know in order to do that? And this is all about addressing the 10 things that you really need to know, rather than piecemealing these things together over years of time or figuring it out on your own. You're going to get it all right here, right now. Although, in all honesty, this is probably going to be a two-parter, because 10 things is a lot to cover in one episode, because as always, I'll be addressing your questions and things that can often go a little bit on some tangents and take up quite a bit of the time here for the episode. So we'll probably get to the first 5 in today's episode, and then the second 5 will be coming on next week. So without further ado, let's jump right into it with the first and probably the most important thing to understand about building muscle with calisthenics is that fundamentally, calisthenics is just another form of weightlifting. And this is extremely important to understand, because when we start addressing a new modality, like we may have come from the world of free weights and machines and kettlebells and all these other sorts of things, and then we start to look at something like using calisthenics, or maybe you're using even a different modality like bands or something, you start to think, okay, it's a different vehicle, therefore I need different instructions on how to get to the destination I want. But for the most part, if you're traveling along the same routes and paths to get to the destination, you're operating the vehicle differently, which we'll get into in a little bit here. But to a large degree, you don't do anything different. Fundamentally, you're still doing the same thing. You want to be addressing your use of your body and how you're using your muscles and everything to the same degree. And this is going to save you a lot of time and a lot of energy, because one of the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to using calisthenics for the sake of building muscle and strength is they start to radically change things around. And they really go off on all these tangents of how they're addressing things. Because calisthenics can be a very wide discipline. It can encompass everything from yoga to rock climbing to parkour and martial arts and calisthenics style like skills and tricks and all these. There's a lot of different ways you can approach calisthenics training. But when it comes to building muscle and strength, you came and you're like, I just want this sort of thing. Basically, what you want to do is address it like body weight bodybuilding. You want to be using your body in pretty much the same typical fashion as you would be if you were lifting free weights and machines. So whatever you're doing with the machines and the free weights in the gym, you do pretty much the exact same thing with your body, just with a different modality. And if you're changing the modalities, if you're changing things up to a large degree, that's going to send you off in different directions. And when you do that, inevitably, because you're using your body differently, you're going to get different results. And people often make the mistake of thinking, well, I got a different result, maybe to the detriment of what you wanted, then, oh, calisthenics doesn't work, or I can't do it with this modality or whatever. When in reality, you basically had a car and you knew how to get to the airport, and then you bought a pickup truck and you're like, okay, now I need to follow a completely different set of plans or a different route to get there. And you end up in this completely other part of town. And you think, well, I can't get there with a pickup truck. No, it's because you think you need to do something different. And reality is you don't, because fundamentally calisthenics is still weightlifting. You're still generating resistance against your muscles by lifting a unit of mass or a weight up against the pull of Earth's gravity. Only in this case, the weight is, well, you. So it's not any different than free weights. It's not any different than cables or machines or Cybex, hammer fit, whatever you did in the gym with that stuff, you do with calisthenics, and you don't really do anything all that different. You still want to address it as body weight bodybuilding. So that's point number one. Let me get into some of these questions here. Folks are coming on in. Michael, drop weight daddy. Kudos, Calisthenics Jedi Master Matt. Thank you very much, Michael. Always good to see you here. Ben is asking here, hey, Matt, thank you for all the content. I do martial arts for my whole life. Now thinking about starting Taekwondo. Hey, been doing that since I was 10. Well, very good. I would like to know what brought you to Taekwondo and what you love about it. Well, basically, I got involved with it from at a young age. Like a lot of kids you do, sometimes you get into the martial arts because kind of getting a little picked on, you're feeling insecure, you're feeling a little bit vulnerable and stuff, and you want to involve yourself in something that makes you feel like you can kind of handle yourself a bit. And one of my longtime good childhood friends, who I'm still friends with, I saw him last month down in Florida, he was already involved with Taekwondo. And growing up in upstate Vermont, you don't have a whole lot of options, or at least back then, for any type of physical activity. And that was pretty much the only thing available at the time. So I was talking to him about it. I was like, I don't know how to fight. I don't even know how to like hit anything. And he's like, well, why don't you just come over and join me in Taekwondo? And I said, that sounds like a good idea. And so then I did exactly that. And I've always had different reasons for sticking with it over the years, sometimes for physical development, sometimes for building up my self-worth and self-esteem. Sometimes it's just plain old fun. It's a great time to play with stuff. But I've always been much more of the striker with things. I never got into the judos and the jujitsus and stuff that had a lot of takedowns and rolling around and wrestling and things like that, because I was always much more like, I just want to hit something. There's something that feels very satisfying and primal about striking a heavy bag or going one-on-one with an opponent when I'm not trying to take them down, but I'm actually trying to physically attack them. And so that's what I've always liked about the striking arts, and Taekwondo certainly fit that bill to a large degree. And again, I didn't have a whole lot of other options, so that's why I got into it, and I've stuck with it all this time. So let's go into point number two. So we got into point number one, which was that fundamentally calisthenics is just another form of weightlifting. It's not supposed to be radically different. And if you're making it very different, don't be surprised that you're getting different results, which dovetails into point number two, which is the programming and the utilization of calisthenics should match very much with whatever programming you would use with free weights and machines. And so especially for those of you who are coming to calisthenics with a background in using free weights and machines, take whatever programs you had with that stuff and just do the same thing with calisthenics. So if you're doing 5x5 with weights, you do 5x5 with calisthenics. If you do 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps with weights, you do 3 sets of 8 to 12 with calisthenics. If you do upper lower body splits with calisthenics. Same thing. Back in the day, when I worked at one of the small gyms in Vermont, when I was starting to get into this grind style type of calisthenics training, I mean, back then we didn't have smartphones or anything. So we had these things in the cardio section called magazines, where you would be on the elliptical and you'd be flipping through good housekeeping and stuff. And of course, like any good gym at the time, we had tons of bodybuilding magazines like Flex and all these sorts of weeder publications and stuff, Muscle and Fitness, Men's Health, that sort of thing. So I would go through these magazines and I would find the routines that they would have, which they inevitably always had. And I would say, okay, here's the routine for bigger arms or wider back. And then I would basically say, this is what they were using, free weights and machines and stuff. Now I'm going to just port that over to calisthenics training, and I'm going to do the same movements, the same level of resistance for weight and reps and resistance to be the same. I'm just going to do with calisthenics. I would just use the same program and there, which is kind of a little liberating when you think about it, because there's a lot of stuff out there. I get questions about, oh, I found this calisthenics routine on Reddit, and I found this calisthenics routine that's getting really popular and stuff. And it's good to find these things as a good starting point, as a template for sure. But at the same time, I'm like, you don't need a special routine to practice calisthenics. Just find any routine. Find any type of muscle building style focused routine with basic fundamental movement patterns, push, pull, squat, curls, that sort of thing, and just do the exact same thing with calisthenics. You don't need a special routine. And again, the more you think you need a special routine, the more the chances are that you're going to really kind of miss the mark when it comes to your programming or how much volume you're using and how much resistance you're using, because you don't need anything special in order to build muscle with calisthenics, because ultimately you're doing the same thing. It's just another form of weightlifting. So use whatever routines you like, whatever has worked for you in the past, whatever you feel fits your schedule and your preferences, or just find anything, just a muscle building routine, click, go for it. Or classic routines that you would find from the golden age, Arnold Schwarzenegger's bodybuilding routine, Tom Platz's squat routine, whatever you can find, and just do the calisthenics version of that routine. So you don't need anything special. You don't need to limit yourself to these few routines that get popular out there. You can use anything you want. It's just more about noticing and knowing how do you use calisthenics to make it fit, which I'll go over in point number 3 here in a sec, but let me get to some more questions. Excuse me, folks. Still working out through this cough. I went to the doctor the other day and they're like, yeah, you've got some inflammation in your cardio system here. It's probably going to be another 4 to 6 weeks until you're back on your feet fully. I'm like, oh, great. There's nothing I can do. And they're like, yep, not really. So Alan, lost in Canada, coming back saying, hey, Matt, I'm tired of all the fitness dogma. Hey, you and me both. I switched from training my legs twice a week to once a week, and this is working much better. Thanks for all your videos on the fitness rat race. You're more than welcome. And this is a good example of that. Remember that routines out there on the internet are meant to merely serve as a starting point, as a template for your training. You're supposed to change them. You're supposed to modify them. You're supposed to give them a good shot for several weeks or a month. And then after a while, use your own experience to know what's working for you and not. So lost here in Alan, lost in Canada, saying, I tried doing it once a week and I found that's working better. Great. It doesn't matter if there's some sort of routine from an expert saying this is the best, greatest, wonderfulest thing in the world. If you change and modify it and you get better feedback from it, well, then it's just better doing it that way. Case closed. So utilize programs as a starting point, but never something that you have to dogmatically follow, because you don't want the routine to be in charge. You want to be in charge. That's what we call discipline. When you are making choices and decisions on what is actually best for you, rather than mindlessly, dogmatically following the instructions someone else gave you, then you're more in control. You're free to do what is best for you. And not only does that help to relieve a lot of stress on mind, body, and lifestyle, but it also helps you get much better results too. So always be paying attention to the feedback that you're getting from these routines that you're practicing. Notice how your recovery is. Notice how things feel during the workout. If certain exercises feel like they're better on your joints, then go with those. If certain exercises are working a muscle more, then go with that. So utilize, experiment, and always be evolving your routines. I know we like to think that I want to find the plan that's going to set me up for life. It's kind of like in the fairy tales. We love the happily ever after endings where you work and you struggle and you strive, but then you find that plan or that diet or something that is just, oh, now it's perfect and it's all happy and I'm just going to ride off into the sunset and live happily ever after with this plan. But that never happens. Even if you do find something that you feel is the best, most wonderfulest plan in the world, your life is going to change. Your goals are going to change. Your preferences are going to change. Your skills and abilities and resources are going to change. And that's why your plan should always be evolving, changing, and adapting over time, because the more it stays static and frozen in time and you're forcing yourself to obedient follow it, you're losing an independent, freedom, disciplined approach. And not only is that a lot harder on mind, body, and lifestyle, but it's also just not going to get you nearly as far as you want to go as well. You're putting in more effort for less return. So let's address more things here. Random Rick reviews saying, I drive by my gym on the way home daily, still no results. No, but you do have results. Your bank account is lighter because if you have a membership to that, you're still paying for that and you're getting those little twinges of guilt about not going to the gym. We always get a result from whatever we're doing. Even non-action produces a result. But I know what you mean. Thanks for the laugh there. It's good humor here. Live to Perform saying, hey, Matt, question regarding training max versus true max. Is training max 80 to 90% beneficial to avoid plateauing during a training cycle, or does working at 100 to get, quote, confident on handling heavy lifting work? So remember, my friends, that there are benefits to a wide range of levels of intensity here. If you haven't checked it out, Dragon Door has been publishing several articles on accommodation from Paul Wade lately. And one of the strategies that he talked about in the latest article that he posted was changing up the intensity level, because there's beneficial results from lower intensities, 50, 60, 70 intensity, where the reps are higher. And there's benefits from higher intensities, 80, 90, 100%. And you're 100% right. Getting, quote, confident in the lift is very key as well, because you want to get heavy or used to those heavier loads. But we get in trouble when we think, oh, that's the one correct way, talking again about dogmatically obeying and following a type of plan or a program, usually ones that we just imagined in our own head, in thinking like, oh, in order to get strong, I have to always lift at this one intensity. So there's benefits to going very heavy. There's benefits to going lighter, and you don't have to train one way in order to get a result. We often think this is the one way we can get this type of productivity in our workouts, and it's simply not true. Check out Dan John's book, Easy Strength. The whole premise of that book is being able to build really good strength, but using relatively light loads, like deadlifting 135. So the plan is that you're not necessarily getting stronger just at the heavy stuff, but you get better and more proficient at using the easier loads. So if you're getting stronger using lighter weights, then that strength naturally carries over because everything gets elevated there. So to answer your question, you're always going to have accommodation and plateau whenever your routine is staying static and the same, no matter what you do. But if you have a variation in what your training is doing, then you're going to give a much broader stimulus in your training. And that's very beneficial for a number of things. So to answer your question, yes, definitely change things up. Ben is saying, your routines and approach has helped dealing and healing my shoulder pain. Very good. Speaking as someone who has had shoulder pain most of my life, glad to hear that. I had for more than a year. I love the tension, control, and stability you bring in. Hey, man, that's our foundation. Tension, control, and stability. You're only as strong as you are stable, and you can only work a muscle to the degree you can engage it. And we can always learn to engage and control our tension better. That is a skill of strength training that you can always develop. It's never a case of like, oh, I now have good mind-muscle connection with my lats. Good, that's taken care of. That's done, checked off that box. I don't have to work on it anymore. No, as I'm learning very much, as my tension control has been improving over the past several years, even though you feel it improving and you may think to yourself, I've got better tension control in my glutes and my lats and my hamstrings, there's always a higher level you can go at. And as that tension control improves, it's a lot easier on the joints, but also makes the workouts a heck of a lot more satisfying as well. Okay. One more here. Leo's going on his push-up thing. Practicing push-ups every day seems to be a very good plan. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's a terrible idea. It all depends on what the tool is, folks. Remember that when we're programming our workouts, every approach is just a tool in the toolbox. High volume is a tool, low volume is a tool, high intensity is a tool, lower intensity is a tool. And as you're going through your programming, you need to know what the tools do, what they're appropriate for. Otherwise, you're a carpenter who's using a hammer for everything. Phillips head screw, good, I'm going to hammer it in. Table, or I need to cut this board in half. I'm going to just hit it with this hammer until it breaks. We always want to recognize that everything out there has its pros and cons. Sometimes high volume is very good. Sometimes high volume is very bad. Sometimes high intensity is very good. Sometimes it's very bad. And if you don't know what situations the good and the bad are, then chances are very good you're going to misapply it. And if you're a coach, you damn well better know when it is. And this is kind of a little litmus test that I like to give people, who is a way to see how dogmatic they are. If they're really gung-ho about an exercise or gung-ho about a piece of equipment, I'll ask them, when is this exercise going to be inappropriate to use? When is this a piece of equipment going to be inappropriate for a client? So if they're gung-ho and crazy about kettlebells, for example, okay, when should someone not use kettlebells? When would it be bad for them to use kettlebells? And they better damn well have an answer. I could give you 100 scenarios where calisthenics would be a horrible thing to practice for somebody, because there's always a scenario where it's a bad idea. It's out there somewhere. Maybe it's a relatively rare scenario, but still, it's going to be out there. And if you don't know where that is, and you don't, or at least not looking for it, sooner or later, you're going to try and hammer in a Phillips head screw with a sledgehammer. And that's only going to be working against you. So as much as we love our methods, as much as we get great results from something, always recognize that it's good sometimes, it's bad other times, and other times it may be meh, but there's probably still something better off that we should be doing. Here's another good one to follow up. Aaron is saying, is doing 1,000 push-ups useful or pointless? On what time scale? 1,000 push-ups in a year? 1,000 push-ups a day, 1,000 push-ups in an hour, right? Always remember that everything in fitness, my friends, is about speed. Okay, every time you change anything about diet and exercise, you're not actually making anything happen. Okay, when you exercise, when you change your diet, you're not doing anything. You're not making anything different happen, because fundamentally, the way fitness works is that our diet and exercise habits take the fundamental processes of modern human nature, which is already running completely on autopilot anyway, and we're either speeding up or slowing down part of that process. And the time frame of those 1,000 push-ups would influence that speed. Okay, so let's just say I kind of know where you're going with this. You know, it's 1,000 push-ups in a day. Well, remember that when we're training, we're not doing work. Never make work the point. Far too often, people are just trying to work their way to results. They're trying to work they're trying to put in enough effort because they've been sold on this idea that you get out what you put in, which is not at all true, or that if you just put in more effort and work or do more work, you're going to get more back. Again, not at all the case. Hard work and doing exercise is nothing more than an investment. You're investing time and energy. And like any good investment, financial investment, there's no promise whatsoever it's going to be worthwhile. Hell, it could be bad if you're misapplying things. So when we're talking about training effectively, we don't want to be basing our productivity on how much work you're putting into it, because there's a million variables out there that say you should put in more work. I mean, 1,000 push-ups may be not enough, or 1,000 push-ups could be far too much. It's all about understanding what fundamental objective you're trying to achieve in your training. That's what you want to focus on. I cover that in many of my books. Be Fit, Live Free, my latest one. I cover that. I cover that in micro workouts. I cover that in progressive and weighted calisthenics, grind style calisthenics. All of these books, they all talk about the fundamental objectives you're trying to achieve in your workouts, because that's what makes your workouts effective. I don't care if you do 10 push-ups or 1,000 push-ups. That's not what makes your training effective. Okay, what does is how well you're achieving your fundamental objectives. And then once you understand what that is, do however much amount of work you can or need to put in to achieve that objective. Okay, so again, it's like driving to a destination. If you were saying, how do I get to the airport? I'm not going to tell you drive for 30 minutes, right? That's a pointless piece of information. But that's exactly how we address so much of our fitness these days. How much work should I do? Hell if I know. It could be a lot, could be a little. Some days it could be more, some days it should be less, right? Chances are no matter what answer I give you, it's going to be wrong most of the time. Because if I said drive for 30 minutes to get to the airport, what are the chances? It's always going to take exactly 30 minutes. So let's say you can get there in 20 minutes. What do? Just keep driving around the parking lot for 10 minutes? I got to drive for 30 minutes. The instructions say I got to drive for 30 minutes. So I'm already there. I already reached my destination, but I got to keep working because I don't know what I'm doing. But that's exactly what happens with this sort of thing. People have achieved their objective or their training objective with 200 push-ups, and now you're doing 800 push-ups just driving around in circles, wasting time and energy. So it could be pointless, much of the work, right? Or you're saying, okay, I got to drive 30 minutes to get to the airport. You drive 30 minutes, you're still not there, but you just stop in the middle of the road. And you see the airport there on the horizon. You're like, well, I was 10 miles short. Oh, well, right? But the instructions say only drive 30 minutes. So that would be the case of, again, you're doing a certain amount of work. Never make the amount of work the goal. I don't care how much you work. I don't care how long your workouts are. I don't care how many sets and reps you do. That's not what makes your workouts effective. What makes your workouts effective is understanding the fundamental objective you're trying to achieve. And then you do however much work you need to do, because that's how life works. If I need to get to the airport, I'm going to drive however long it takes for me to get to the airport. Could take 20 minutes, could take an hour and a half. I'm just going to put in whatever it takes to get there. But once I get there, I'm going to stop. And that's what we want to do with our training. And I cover that a lot more in past episodes of this podcast, videos on my YouTube channel. If you just search on the channel, fundamental objectives or training objectives, you'll find those, because it's a whole nother topic I don't want to get into. But that's what makes your workout effective. So, but it's also totally blind. 1,000 push-ups, is that going to be effective? Is it used for opponents? Damned if I know. There's no reference for me to know what your objective is. There's no reference for me to know if that's going to achieve it. That's not. So I know just as much as you do right there. But you do as much work as necessary is the point I'm trying to get to. Let's get back on track here. So point number 3, building more muscle and strength with calisthenics training. This is kind of like 3 mini points together, is employ what I call the calisthenics triple threat. Now, the calisthenics triple threat is the 3 particular disciplines in grind style calisthenics. We have progressive calisthenics, we have weighted calisthenics, we have suspension calisthenics. And yes, of course, I have books on these topics to address these in much more detail. But here's why you want potentially all 3 to some degree, because each one has its pros and its cons. Like I was talking about earlier, sometimes progressive calisthenics is the best thing to do. Sometimes it's not the best thing to do. Same thing with weighted calisthenics. Same thing with suspension calisthenics. They are calisthenics style disciplines. And some people will argue like, oh, it's not real bodyweight training if you're using weights, or it's not real bodyweight training if you're using this other equipment. That's nonsense talking, because now what you're doing is you're basing your training modalities off of packaging, off of a label. I've heard people say, well, if you use a weight vest, that's not real bodyweight training. Who the hell cares? Sometimes people will ask me, are barbell back squats calisthenics? Like, is it a weighted calisthenics? Sure, or no, or whatever. Put it in whatever labeled box you want to put it in, but don't base your programming and methodology on the label you put on an exercise, right? That's not what you want to base things off of, because that's not the appropriate way to achieve your fundamental training objective. What you should do is look at something and say, is this going to be a practical and effective way for me to achieve the training stimulus that I'm after? And if the answer is yes, then you do it. It doesn't matter what label you put on it. But in the world of calisthenics, we can say it's broadly like body weight based, if you will, right? We are still fundamentally generating most of our resistance through moving our body through space by pushing against the resistance of Earth's gravity. And the reason why we want all three is because each one has its pros and its cons, but each one's pros mitigate or minimize the cons of the others. Okay, so for example, progressive calisthenics, the simplest, most minimalist form of bodyweight training. All you need is a pull-up bar and the floor beneath your feet. And if you don't have the floor beneath your feet, well, you got bigger problems. But the beautiful thing about that is that you adjust resistance through adjusting your technique, which not only helps you build strength and muscle, but it also helps you build coordination, tension control, stability, mobility, and a host of other things, because advanced techniques require more than just strength. So that's a beautiful thing about it. The downside, though, is that it also requires more than strength. So sometimes people will get stuck being able to apply more resistance to their muscles because they don't have the stability, they don't have the coordination, they don't have the other softer qualities to access the higher level techniques to get more resistance on the muscle. So they get kind of stuck. They're kind of limited on that regard. So that's why we have weighted calisthenics. Weighted calisthenics are still fundamentally the same thing. You're still applying resistance, progressive resistance against the muscle by adding weight to the working muscles. You're just going about it a different way. But instead of adjusting your technique, now you're adding or subtracting weight from your body. So you can make the alteration of resistance a lot easier, but you don't need to necessarily develop some of those other qualities to hold you back in the short term. The downside, though, is it's not as simple. You need more equipment. You need potentially more space, depending on where your equipment is. It's not as portable, not as independent, and so on. So the progressive calisthenics freedom and independence fixes that. And then the simplicity or the technical, the lack of technical challenge of weighted calisthenics fixes that. And then we have suspension calisthenics. The suspension straps are essentially a weight machine that fits in your pocket. They give you access to a host of other bodybuilding techniques. Like I was talking about earlier, how I used to take bodybuilding routines from those magazines and just port it over to a calisthenics base. Well, I would use a lot of suspension straps for that because I would see them doing hamstring curls, bicep curls, chest flies, all these things to focus on single joint movements like a bodybuilder would. Well, you can do that with rings or suspension straps to a very large degree. So that gives you access to some of those techniques. It also gives you a wider range of the ability to adjust the resistance on your muscles, focusing on certain muscle groups like your biceps or your triceps and so on. And it gives you that type of freedom of programming as well. The downside is you need a place to hang them. You need the equipment and you need to know how to use them very well. And there's a lot of ways that you can kind of get lost in the weeds in the technical details of suspension calisthenics, which the weighted calisthenics and the progressive calisthenics also fills in those gaps. So when you've got all three in your wheelhouse, now you've got all the benefits and none of the potential downsides, because they all erase each other's downsides. And typically you're going to find that you're going to spend most of your time in one or two of those disciplines. For example, most of my calisthenics training is progressive and suspension calisthenics. I don't do a whole lot of the weighted stuff. I use it more as a supplemental thing. Other people, they do a lot of weighted calisthenics, and the progressive stuff is supplemental. So it really just boils down again to preference and what kind of equipment you have and what you feel is working best for you. But nonetheless, I always encourage folks, have at least access or some degree of all three in your repertoire, because then you get all the benefits and none of the downsides to classic calisthenics training that often trips a lot of people up when it comes to building muscle and strength. It's about giving yourself the biggest toolbox available, so that way you can have the appropriate tools for what you're trying to achieve and what you can do to achieve those fundamental training stimuluses that I'll be addressing in the next episode. And that gives you the best chance, rather than getting stuck in some sort of, not so much a plateau, but limitations due to lack of proficiency, lack of coordination, lack of equipment, or lack of the ability to increase the resistance on your muscles, when it's very easy to overcome if you just add in a couple of other things. So that's why you want the triple threat. That's why you want all three to at least some degree. Adam's following up saying, how can I stop jumping from one thing to another, like program hopping and stuff? Well, always remember, again, and I'll be addressing this next week, folks, it's on my notes, is it boils down to the objective you're trying to achieve. When you know what your training stimulus is, what you're trying to achieve with it, you can probably, for the most part, when you're jumping from one thing to the other, as long as you're achieving the same fundamental objective, it really doesn't matter what you're doing. So you can be jumping this happens a lot of times with people where they'll jump from one thing to the next, but fundamentally they're still doing the same thing. So they're still achieving the same objective, and they're just changing around the superficial details that don't really matter very much. Okay, so it's kind of like, what if I do archer push-ups versus weighted push-ups? Well, as long as you're still challenging your push chain with the same relatively level of resistance, like 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps, you're really not doing anything different. I know it seems like you're doing things different because a lot of times in our fitness culture, we think that changing the superficial details makes a big difference. But most of the time you're not. And this happens a lot in fitness where people will change things superficially. But remember, it's the deep, deep fundamental layers that actually matter. I used to train with this guy, high school kid. And it was like every single time I saw him, he was like, okay, I made this change to my diet and that change to my diet and this other change to my diet. He was always excited about what changes he was making. But ultimately, these changes were just too superficial to really do anything. And at the end of several months, I was like, dude, you think you're making all these changes, but you're really not. You're still eating a ton of junk food. You're still not getting much protein. You're still not focusing on getting enough food and whole, natural, satisfying foods. All you're doing is you're eating different potato chips. You're eating different kinds of cookies. This doesn't do anything. I know you're thinking lower sodium or lower fat or something. That doesn't do anything. It doesn't matter if it's organic or vegan or paleo or whatever. You're still eating cookies all the time. You need to be eating more fruit and more protein sources and stuff. And that happens a lot where we change from one thing to the next. We're usually just changing superficial, trivial details that ultimately doesn't really matter very much. Because when you understand how things work on a fundamental level, you recognize, again, like I was saying earlier, calisthenics, just another form of weightlifting. So ultimately, you shouldn't be getting different results from calisthenics than you did with weightlifting. If you were like, oh, I did calisthenics and got better results, like what I did, that's not on the calisthenics. That's because you're doing it differently somehow. That's better. And you should have been doing it that way with the weights or vice versa to begin with. And that's what you really want to take home with the lesson there. So yeah, change things around as much as you like to just suit preferences and needs and stuff. But if you're fundamentally doing the same thing, don't expect different results. Lorenzo, it's good to talk to you. Hello, Matt. I've been doing overcoming yielding isometrics only workouts. Yep. I do it leaving a day for activity and recovery, stretching mobility drills. If I have gas in the tank, should I try to do more? No, sure, absolutely. I'm always a fan. So there's a little bit of a back and forth that I see how people can get confused. Like, I'm all about simple, quick, and efficient workouts, right? I wrote the book, Micro Workouts, right? In most of my workouts, 15 minutes, if that. Most of my stuff is really short and really simple and straight to the point. Because again, I know what my fundamental objective is. When you know what that objective is, you're like, oh, that's all I got to do. I can do that in 10 minutes. What the hell am I doing in a gym for an hour? But at the same time, I'm a very big fan of do as much work as you possibly are willing to do or can do according to your circumstance. If you can do more, do more. And in the next episode, I know I keep saying that, I'm going to be addressing why, in many cases, if you're following a program, it's probably holding you back because you're following the program. You made the program the thing that you're trying to do, not your fundamental objective. So when you are doing your workouts, if you are like, I can keep going, I can do more stuff, by all means, keep going. Now, isometrics is a little bit different because especially if you're not using something like, an isomax that gives you a quantifiable metric, isometrics is really easy to just do indefinitely forever because it's always resistance according to your level of output. But the isomax allows you to basically use isometrics in the same way you would with weights. Because remember, when you're lifting a weight, what you're doing is you are effectively creating enough tension to move the weight. And when you can't create that much tension, you stop lifting the weight. That's going to failure, as they would say. So that's all that. I guess that's all I've got my muscles for today. But you don't really get that too much with isometrics if you're using like an iso loop or an iso trainer or something of that degree. Yielding isometrics, you do get that because, of course, you can't hold the position anymore because you can't generate that much tension. So you're getting that with yielding, but with the regular isometrics, not so much. So if I were you, I would definitely combine the two so you're getting that feedback. But the bottom line is, if you got more in the tank, yeah, sure, go for it. Absolutely, 100%. You utilize more if you can. You'll get better results out of it. If you can do more, do more. If you can't do as much, well, then do less. That's the whole point of adaptive training that I talk about also in several of my books and my new quick read, Adaptive Training. Cristobal saying, hey, Matt, do you do false grip pulling exercise like pull-ups or rows on a regular basis? No, I pretty much always keep my thumb, wrapped around. Although I've got the new, oh God, what are they called? I call them the hatchet handles, the V2 Max Swissies from Kensui. So, right, Kensui's got these Swissies, these neutral grip handles that you can hold on to. Well, now they've got ones that have like a platform or a flat surface that extends down. I call them hatchet handles because it looks like the head of a hatchet. So when you grab onto it, the pad extends down onto your palm. And of course, that has to be a false grip. You can't get your thumb around it. And those feel amazing. Those feel really, really good to use. I'm going to be coming out with a video review on those momentarily in the short form. So make sure you follow the RDP YouTube channel for the review on that and stuff, because they're just fun to use. They're fantastic. But again, we're talking superficial, and do they really matter, right? Does it matter if I'm using these handles versus regular rope handles or the V2 Maxes or false grip? Not really. No, because it's too superficial of a detail. And in those cases, I usually tell people, just do whatever you want. Just do whatever feels good. Well, I like how this feels. I like how this is feeling. I don't know why this feels just more comfortable if I grab it this way. Okay, great, whatever. Are you still just pulling? You're still getting your pull chain, big range of motion. You're still challenging your pull chain. Great. Okay, that's all that really matters. Just do whatever the heck you want. Most things too superficial to really be that much of a difference. But as I always say, it doesn't matter unless it matters to you. And if you come in, you're like, it just feels better this way. I like it. Well, then there you go. That's what you should be basing that off of. Oh, good. Yes, back and forth. So he missed the beginning, folks. He missed the beginning when I was talking. Really can't weight train is superior in every aspect of muscle building. If you don't know what you're doing, yes. But as I was talking before, calisthenics is weight training. It is weightlifting. And I had the same attitude. I believed that for years myself. And then I went from weights to calisthenics, and I got far better results with calisthenics. And I thought, oh, calisthenics is awesome. No, it's because I was doing it better. It's the same argument we always had in martial arts. Who would win in a fight? Karate versus Kung Fu, Judo versus Muay Thai, and all this. It's the better martial artist that wins, right? Your results don't depend much on the method that you're using. As long as you've got progressive resistance, that's all the method needs, right? The only thing that makes a method effective is if it can provide progressive resistance against the muscles you're working. If you've got that, it's as good as it can possibly get, right? Beyond that, it's entirely on you. If you get better results with a method, it's because you're better at using that method. It's not the method in question. It's always about you. Your results depend on your focus, your proficiency, your discipline, your programming, your ability, your ability, your motivation. It's you that gets the results. Methods don't really do anything for you. It's what you bring to the method that gets you the result. And when you understand that, oh, that's the real game changer right there. But if you're always believing it's the method that's important, you're always going to be holding yourself back, because it's like saying, I can't get to the airport unless I drive a black pickup truck. And great if you've got a black pickup truck, but then you look at, well, that's a red sedan. I shouldn't drive that. I can't get there with that. Now you're limiting yourself because you're throwing away perfectly good methods for the sake of superficial things that aren't really that important. Excuse me. Joseph saying, hello, Matt. I'm working on my rows for my back engagement. It's still not good. Keep at it. It's practice, my friend. Practice. Practicing the engagement muscle activation is a skill. And it's like any skill. I don't know. It could take you a week or two to get better at this. It could take you several years. Are you getting the isometrics in too? Isometrics is by far the best way to get better at muscular engagement, especially for the back. I got better at engaging and utilizing my back better to a higher degree in 2 days than I had in the previous 2 years before that. So maybe you might want to try that as a way to supplement things or as part of your warm-ups. But I know where you're coming from. I mean, hell, my back activation wasn't very good for a long time. And only in the past, I would say 6 months, have my lat engagements really improved. And holy smokes, has that been making a hell of a difference. It's been very much the game changer. Let's go to a couple more real quick here. Point number 4. Yeah, because the triple threat was 3 in 1 there. So small muscle areas. This is a question I often get addressed a lot in the calisthenics community, is where people are like, okay, so what kind of exercises do I do to like focus on my upper chest or my inner chest or my lateral deltoid or this long head or short head or whatever of the triceps and the biceps and stuff like this? These are attitudes that are coming, of course, from the world of like free weight machine bodybuilding stuff. And to this, I usually tell people, don't even worry about it. Don't worry about focusing on the upper chest. Don't worry about focusing on the lateral head and stuff like that for several reasons. One is, for the most part, that area of the muscle is usually underdeveloped because the whole area is underdeveloped. The best way to get your upper chest to get bigger, build a bigger chest, period. The best way to get your lateral deltoids bigger, build bigger shoulders, period. The best way to get that sweep in your quads, build bigger quads overall. So that just generally means that whole area, that muscle group, is just not as developed as it should be. And that leads to point number 2, is usually when we have these little fine point areas that we're trying to focus on, like trying to get my upper inner chest or my lateral deltoids, it usually doesn't really do a whole heck of a lot and that's not even calisthenics, it's just weights. You know, tons of guys doing lateral raises with dumbbells and you just can't get their shoulders to get bigger and stuff. It's like, well, what you need to do is just really load up the hell out of that bar and start doing heavier shoulder presses or something to get the muscle to be much bigger and stronger. That's typically what we need to do, is focus on just getting much stronger at the overall movement pattern that works the muscle to begin with. So don't worry too much about those sorts of things, because I promise you, if you build much stronger, bigger shoulders from handstand work or the general use of your shoulders working better and dips and pull-ups and rows and stuff, you're probably going to find, well, my lateral deltoids are perfectly fine. I don't need them to be much bigger as it is. Same with the upper chest, same with like the inner thigh and all these other sorts of things. When you've got the muscular integration with bigger, heavier, stronger movements, you typically don't need to bloat out your workout with a lot of other exercises to kind of nitpick and finely tune different areas of a muscle group or of your physique. Yes, it does matter if you're a bodybuilder going to step on stage and trying to work for that perfect balance and symmetry, because spending the time and energy on those exercises to make the smallest little bit of a difference can matter on the judges' scorecards. But for the average Joe Schmo, it was like, I just want to get bigger and stronger. I want to have a decent build in my physique. It's usually one of those cases of you have to invest a lot more time and energy, and you're not really going to get a whole lot out of it to make it worthwhile. So that's why, for the most part, when it comes to addressing those little areas of calisthenics, don't worry about it. It's not something that's going to probably make that much difference. Let's see, one last one here is the last point for today's episode. I'll address more next week when it comes to building muscle calisthenics, is focus on the utilization of high resistance yet low skill techniques and exercises. And this one particularly goes for the calisthenics community, because when it comes to calisthenics, a lot of us get lost in the hype and the excitement of, quote, skills. right? The calisthenics skills that require a lot of stability and a lot of control and a lot of technical proficiency. But when it comes to trying to just build up muscle and strength, those things, as I was addressing earlier, can often stand in our way of being able to achieve the fundamental objective we need to get in our training. And back in the 2000s, early aughts, some people may not remember this, or even in the late 90s, functional training in quotes got all the rage, where it's like, oh no, you shouldn't deadlift. Oh, you shouldn't be on the leg press. You shouldn't bench press. Instead, you need to be standing on one leg on a Bosu ball while juggling kettlebells and saying the alphabet backwards and all these sorts of things. It was more of a move towards training styles that required a lot more stability and technical skill to it. And rightfully so, because some people, they'd be sitting on a bicep preacher curl machine, hammer strength machine, which required very little skill, but then they would go and be athletes on the wrestling mat or the basketball or whatever, and they'd be like, it's doing nothing for me. In fact, I'm getting hurt and I'm getting injured because I don't have the stability and I don't have the coordination and the tension control. And so therefore, this whole bodybuilding thing is out the window. It needs to be, quote, functional, which requires more stability. But the problem is they went way in the other direction. And now they're utilizing things that are so unstable and require so much skill that it's really hard to challenge the muscle against any serious resistance. So people actually got smaller and weaker from that training because, yes, they needed a little more stability and a little bit more skill in their training, but not that much. It went way too far. And in the world of calisthenics, sometimes people get stuck in that same mentality where they're doing exercises that are really challenging on their skill and proficiency. But the more it's a challenge on the skill and proficiency, the less challenging you can really build into actually challenging the actual strength and capacity of the muscles. So when it comes to bodyweight bodybuilding, yes, doing ring dips are going to be a little bit more skill intensive than doing dips on bars, but you can overcome that relatively quickly and easily and still blast the mother living hell out of the muscles. You can get a good degree of work in the legs if you have a little bit of support with one of your arms on something like a door frame or something. That's why in grind style calisthenics, I very rarely will have people doing things like shrimp squats or pistol squats without any upper body support, because we want to make it easy enough on the skillful level that the skill isn't the limiting factor. We want the muscular work capacity to be the limiting factor of how hard and long you can contract the muscles. So when it comes to bodybuilding, yes, I know it's the relatively, quote, boring exercises. It's not the fancy stuff that's going to help you build up your muscle as effectively as possible. If you can do handstands or handstand push-ups, right, put it against the wall. I was at a handstand seminar one time, and we were all talking about, okay, balancing handstand and maybe even going a little bit to one arm and all these sorts of things. And I asked the guy at the end, the coach, I was like, so if I had a client though, who was like, I just want to build bigger shoulders, I want to build my body up, would you give them these kinds of handstand techniques, or would you have them just do like classic pike push-ups with a weight vest on to really just blast that overhead pushing movement? It's like, oh yeah, the pike push-ups all day long. It's like, don't do this stuff. If you're interested in just building bigger, stronger muscles, don't do the skill stuff. You can still do it if it's interesting to you, but certainly don't expect that to be the way that you're going to build yourself up. And I know a lot of people will say, well, look at this guy on Instagram. He's doing these crazy one-arm muscle-ups and he's big and he's jacked. Yes, but he didn't get big and jacked by doing one-arm muscle-ups. Of course, you build up the skills on the foundation of the low skill exercises, pull-ups, dips, push-ups, things like that. Years of doing that for reps. That's how he built the physique he's got. And then he was just looking for more challenge and something fun to do. And that's how he got the one-arm muscle-ups and all those other stuff. But that's not how he got that physique. So if you're interested in, I want to build up the physique that I want, focus on the low skill, boring exercises. And that's going to make it a lot easier to achieve the fundamental training objective you need to give you the best chance of building the muscle and strength, which I'm going to cover in the next episode. Well, let's get to the last questions here real quick and see where we can end things on, land this plane on a high note here. Lift to Perform saying implementing, overcoming isometric deadlift with a barbell against different pin heights where my weak point is as an accessory work after deadlift works really well after a few cycles. Yeah, that's a classic approach. I mean, bodybuilders, powerlifters have been doing that for long time, working on those sticking points and so on. So it's a great approach. Absolutely. Joseph Bello following up saying, Matt, I do my pike push-ups. Does make a difference in stimulus? I do them before my push-ups or after my push-ups? Fantastic question. So this, again, what's the stimulus? But I'm assuming it's bigger shoulders and stuff. I would do them after your push-ups because you're using the same muscles during the push-ups. Push chain, right? Shoulders, triceps, a little bit of chest, back for stability and stuff. So fundamentally, it's the same muscle group. You're just using it at a different angle. And that angle is enough of a difference that I typically will program pike push-ups and push-ups as slightly different exercises, different emphasis in the shoulders versus chest and so on. But you're smart to ask that because you're putting effort and energy into one, so you're going to have less effort and energy in the other. So you can do an experiment and just go both ways. Do the push-ups first, one workout or a few workouts, then do the pike push-ups first after a few workouts, see how it feels for you. And you're probably better off just switching back and forth and not having one particular approach one way or the other all the time. But I would say whatever you want to emphasize is what you want to do first. So if you're saying, I want to really emphasize that overhead pressing movement, then do that first. Oh, but if the push-ups are what you want to emphasize, do that first. You can also change up the programming so you're superset it back and forth if you like, or you can break it up so you're not doing as much volume of the first exercise. So you're like, I like doing push-ups first, but man, if I do push-ups first, then my overhead pike push-up is just smoked afterwards. Well, maybe you've got 5 sets of push-ups before. Okay, break it down to 2 and then go into your pike push-ups. And then you've got a little bit energy left in the tank. So it's just about pacing yourself, little allocation of energy and resources to do things for the best of helping you achieve that stimulus. Because ultimately, that's what it all boils down to, folks. It's not about the program. It's not about the method. It's not about push-ups versus bench press or anything. It's about understanding what that fundamental training objective is and then just doing whatever the heck you can and want to do to achieve that objective as much as possible. And that's what your results really depend on. Not what method you use or what your program is. It's just whatever's going to achieve that objective as consistently and as easily as possible. And that's why your program and your exercise and stuff does matter, because you're going to find it's easier with different modalities and methods and stuff, but it's going to be different for everybody. So that's, again, why we want to know what that target is. If you're at a shooting range and you have a clear, defined target, you adjust everything you do based on your ability to hit that target. But when it comes to diet and exercise, we usually have no idea what the hell we're trying to hit. So we're just randomly shooting bullets in the air, trying one thing after the other, randomly doing work, crossing our fingers and hoping it's just going to randomly work by chance. And sometimes we do hit something by chance. And then we fall into the mistake of thinking, oh, that worked. That must be the best way to go about it, which leads to a whole nother dogmatic approach. It's like 5x5 is the best because that's what worked best for me. No, it didn't work because it was 5x5. That was just, for whatever reason, the way that it worked best for helping you achieve that objective. We all fall for that from time to time. But the problem with that is now you think that's the thing that's producing results, and you're basing your success on correlation, not causation. So you're still basing it on random chance and luck to a large degree and hoping that it just keeps going. And we don't typically like to base our focus on luck, right? If you know what you're doing, you don't need as much luck. You can say, I know what I'm doing, so I know what type of methodologies I can use, how much work I can put in, and it's based on disciplined decision-making rather than just blindly shooting into the air or obedience to a program which may or not have anything to do with your actual results. Which usually means you're going to work twice as hard for half the success. Finally, he says, Matt, I want to work my pike push-ups to build up my shoulders, but I do not want to neglect my chest. Yeah, so just do both. You're hitting your shoulders and your chest with both. It's not like you're going to get one area with one exercise and the other area with the other exercise. Chest, shoulders, triceps. That's all pushing movements. It doesn't matter what the modality is. Doesn't matter what the equipment is. You're hitting chest, shoulders, triceps with everything. There's just a little change in the flavor and some of the emphasis. That's all you're doing. So use both, utilize both, and then be, again, able to engage the muscles to a high degree to get the most out of the exercises. Alrighty, my friends, there you go. That is part 1 of essential things to know about building muscle with calisthenics training. Next week, I'm going to go into some of the other 5 things that you need to know. And I saved the best for last because this stuff was very important, but the really most important stuff is next week. So don't forget to like and subscribe and all that sort of thing here on the RDP YouTube channel. Again, I post the audio replays of these on the podcast directory of your choice, like Spotify and Apple Podcasts and stuff like that, usually a day or so after I do these. So if you missed anything here, or if you want to just listen to it on your own time, you can do that on your podcast option as well. And it's also, the replay of this video is on the Red Delta Project YouTube channel. So thanks everyone for coming on in. Greatly appreciate it. Love to see you guys on the Instagram channel, on the DMs and stuff. And I will talk to you folks next week. Till then, be fit and live free.